Welcome to the Funnel Reboot Podcast with your host, Glenn Schmeltzley. Let's get into today's show.
Hey, Glenn here. Welcome to Funnel Reboot, the show for analytically minded marketers. We're blessed to have a marketing book author on today, so let's get straight into the show. When you ask numerous companies what their strategy is for how they approach making content, you'll probably be met with a blank look. The norm is haphazard content creation and dissemination. For most of them, there's no cohesive plan, and in light of these challenges, it becomes imperative for companies to see what they're doing with their content and to make it more robust. After all, it's what we rely on to generate demand. Today's discussion delves into a methodology that gets rid of disjointed content and promises to elevate it to a level where it clearly generates demand for a product or service. You're going to hear how a well-crafted content strategy serves as the linchpin for getting marketing goals achieved, fostering a better online presence. Purna Virji is a globally recognized content strategist. She grew up in India, and her family came to the US and settled in Philadelphia, where she went to school, except for when she moved away to Cardiff University for her master's. On returning to Philadelphia, she became a journalist and then a producer at the local PBS affiliate station. And that experience in TV is where she picked up expertise in creating content. She ported her flair for communications into designing pay-per-click ad campaigns for some e-commerce companies. And when Microsoft's own ads platform needed someone in training, she transitioned to working there, helping both internal teams and external groups use Microsoft ads. And she went to speak at conferences on this, like MozCon and SMX Advanced, and was ranked the #1 most influential expert in the world by PPC Hero. She's currently the principal consultant for content solutions at LinkedIn. And in 2023, she came out with a book, High Impact Content Marketing. So today, let's go talk to Purna Virji. Purna Virji, so glad to have you on Funnel Reboot.
Glenn, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. We've got a really good book to get into, and I want to first make sure that everybody knows the title of it. What is it called?
It is called High Impact Content Marketing, Strategies to Make Your Content Intentional, Engaging, and Effective.
Yeah, and it does that. So first, let's kind of deal with the fact that content marketing, or content for that matter, is, you take a pretty broad view of it. We have obviously certain people who, we call them content creators. They make a living based on giving maybe an audience through payment access to what they do. So you can do that, but there are also companies out there that simply can have content that is helpful, content that is on their website, or maybe it takes the form of posts on social media. You favor this larger view of content, right?
Absolutely, because if we think about it, content marketing per se is a term that's just been invented in the last, decade or so. But before that, what type of advertising or marketing was ever done without content? Right? Everything is content, right? From I believe the first advertisement that existed in history, and this is Wikipedia, so it may or may not be accurate.
Okay.
Which says that the first advertisement was a cave drawings on the wall. So I'm like, okay, well, that's content
Wow.
too. That's the first infographic that existed.
Yeah, right. They didn't have Canva, but they certainly were able to get something out. That's very cool. Okay, so if everything is content and we have to do content, a fair number of us see content as being hard work. And I thought, frankly, when I cracked the book open, that what I was going to hear was, yeah, you just have to do a lot of hard work. But you actually gave a contrary view. You kind of said that it's less work and more impact when you do it a certain way. What did you mean by, if it's done the way you favor, it's less work?
The essential message that I was hoping to pass on is so often we feel stuck on this content creation treadmill where we're always, oh God, we've got to put out the next thing, we've got to put out the next thing. And we're feeding this hungry beast of some editorial calendar, but we don't know, like, is it working? It's not working. And sometimes we're like, oh, it's not working. So we just need more content. And, you creating content is so hard to get right. I mean, if you want to do a really good job of creating good content, any creativity takes some effort. And so if you're going to put in the effort anyway, why not stack the odds in your favor? So take time before you create content to make sure that you're understanding who you're creating content for. How will you engage with them? How would you differentiate yourself with them? What's going to make them want to pause and consume your content? Because, Glenn, at the end of the day, like, ignoring content is the easy part. It takes no effort to just scroll past. But
Right.
what takes effort is stopping to read. And whether it's a social media post, a video, a blog post, even a podcast or an event, it's still, you're asking people to give up their time and their sort of effort to consume your content. And so you need to ensure that the value exchange is much more in your audience's favor as well before, so they'll want to
Right.
stop.
Okay. And so if we think of it as something that we're already doing, to be marketing, as you say, everything's content. You kind of brought up, I like the metaphor of thinking of it as food. Now, there are junk foods and there are nutritional foods, and there are, for those of us who, maybe eat a little bit too much food like me,
And
there are there are diets, and some of them are just flat out starvation, and there are others where it's a matter of, well, keep with the things that are nutritional and just have less of the things that aren't. So tell us a little bit more about how you look at that, and how, if we thought of our content, that we shouldn't just go grab a fad diet and, try to starve our audience of content.
exactly, so that's what happens is if we try to, we all know that, okay, the basic best practices if you are wanting to be fit is, eat less, exercise more, and then everybody wants to come up with a silver bullet, or, let's hack this. Like first it was, low fat everything, because fat was the enemy, and then
Yeah.
turned out nothing changed, and then it was, oh no, now it's carbs, and then who knows what it's going to be next. But we keep isolating singular elements in this quest for a silver bullet, and I find that that's a very it's such a good analogy for what many marketers can end up falling into this trap of chasing trends. And you're like, oh my gosh, this new platform is super popular, so we must be on there. And but why, right? Is your audience on there? Maybe they are. If so, how do they use that platform? And because your audience may not use a particular channel or a platform the way that the majority of people use the channel or platform. And
Right.
so you really want to ensure, like, where is my audience? What's going to appeal to them? Where do they hang out? Where's the best place I can connect with them and engage them? And really, where, even what would interest them, and how much awareness do they even have about us?
Right. And so a lot of it comes to, like, taking some time to level set around strategy. And I found it really interesting that you got into a little bit of neuroscience and how humans learn, because, yeah, I guess, if we're just pumping out content for content's sake, it'll either get ignored, or even worse, if it does well enough to be noticed by somebody, but then it doesn't help them at all, or it's not strategically important to them, well, they're probably going to now, be conditioned to, okay, steering away from us. Like, we've made a negative perception, which is worse than no perception. Um, you talk about how we're supposed to think of how people learn and how people retain stuff. Um, like we do as students. And then you bring up this AGES acronym. Can you tell us what
Yes,
that's for?
absolutely. And so I spent many years working in instructional design, working in learning and development at Microsoft, and I spent a lot of time understanding how adults learn and what does it take to motivate us to make behavior changes, and then what does it take for us to sort of retain information and to have impact. And from what I found from my experience there was that there's so many instructional design principles and concepts that translate incredibly well into content marketing, and any company can benefit from it. And there's some things that we do. So one of my favorite sort of frameworks is from the Neuro Leadership Institute, which is called the AGES model, where the A stands for attention, G stands for generate, E stands for emotion, S stands for spacing. So let me break it down in a very summarized version. And
Sure.
some things marketers know and we do really well. So for A, stands for attention. And we all know that in order to actually learn and absorb information, you need to be paying attention to it, right? When you are fully focused, when you're not multitasking, when you're paying attention to something, you tend to retain 1.5 times more information than not. So that's where we think about what's an attention grabbing way of opening, or what's a way that I can present my information or my advertisement in a way that will, not only just grab attention, but hold attention, right? You
Yep.
don't want to get into clickbait territory where like, okay, I clicked, but I didn't live up to it. You need to build trust. So let's say attention. We know that as marketers. G is super cool, which is it's about generating connections. Now, super interestingly, one of the ways that our brains retain information best is if you can connect new information to existing concepts, because then it just helps it go into the longer term memory more.
Hmm.
And that's a big example where if you watch a show like Shark Tank or Dragon's Den in the UK, you will see them saying like, oh, this is the Netflix of taxis or something like that, right? Where they're trying to connect what their business model is by giving it an analogy, and people are like, oh, I get it. Or orange is the new black, or XYZ is the new black, because you get it in that short form. So if you can try to tie in concepts, so if I'm building, let's say in the past, I was trying to build an article trying to get people excited about some new product or feature we had launched. And I'm like, oh, how do I explain this to people in a way that makes it seem less scary and new and foreign? And I'm like, oh, let me try to connect it to this. I'm like, oh, there's no learning curve. You can just do it like this. Or remember how you do this? It's just like that. And so that's a really interesting way to help people advise. Then the E is emotion. I'm going to ask you a question, Glenn. I'm going to ask everyone listening as well this question, which is, if you close your eyes, and you don't have to answer me out loud, if you think about your most vivid childhood memories, just take a couple of seconds and see what comes to mind. I'll have a sip of water, and you don't have to share it. Don't worry. Okay, were those memories times when you were like really like heightened emotion state, whether super, super happy, super scared, super, anything
Right.
emotion? It tends to happen because that's what the heightened emotion tends to lock things in. And so we know that if we are creating a training course, so we want people to pay attention, then make it funny, make learning fun, and then they'll pay attention. Or B2B, Glenn, you've probably seen this so many times where B2B is all like, well, business people are all rational. And so I must write very straightforward, dull, and I cannot show any hint of personality. Or I love what
Yes.
you said earlier, where, the starch was all in. But we realize that people are people, whether we are in our business avatar or our personal. And so we want to work with brands and companies that we like, and showcase your personality, showcase your perspective, like generate some kind of emotion connection, rinse the starch out, as Glenn, you say
Yeah.
so beautifully. So marketers get that. The one thing that I wish marketers would do more comes down to the S. Um, and that is all about spacing. Let's go back to our school days one more time.
Sure.
I don't know if you were like me, but before every exam, I was this, you know, in like eighth grade, like middle school, I was this like terrible brat. And I was like, oh, I never want to study until the last minute. And then I just cram just enough. And then I'd do really well the next day. And then I'd forget everything. So I wouldn't really learn. I'd do enough to nail the test or the exam. And then we'd forget. And
Of
that's the
course.
same way where these crash intensive bursts don't really work. You need to space out. In fact, there's science behind it. The Ebbinghaus curve of forgetting shows that the first time you hear information, you forget 90% of it. Uh, and the more subsequent reviews of the information, the more you retain in your brain. And so how this works for marketers is we'll distribute content once and think it's gone out into the world, everyone's seen it, we're done. Nope, you've got to repeat, right? Create less content, repeat your content more. Repetition helps things stick. And maybe the first time people were not in the right frame of mind to absorb the content, or they were not open to the message yet. But if they see it again and again, the same way that if you go to karaoke now, you'll probably sing a song 20 years ago and remember all the lyrics because
Yep.
you just heard it enough times. So anyway, that's my very long answer, Glenn.
No, it's what I love about it is the learning component is, it's the use of some of these things that we've known for a while. In another part of the book, you bring up Bloom's taxonomy, which,
Mhm.
anybody in education, has probably bumped into. It's, like the lowest level of having a concept is you kind of get it, but the highest level of the concept is that you can actually create something brand new with this new knowledge. That devotion to the audience is something that comes very clearly across in your book. But I guess what I'd like to hear from you is, does this actually come down to brass tacks? Like, can we take these ideas and actually fashion our goals and our outcomes around them so that when we create the content, and if we are true to these principles, then that content will actually drive towards those goals?
100% it can. And I'll give you an example of a webinar, sort of a
Sure.
customer education program that I'd sort of created in one of my previous jobs, where let's say we knew we wanted to educate a bunch of people across, you know, a certain region. So let's say all across North America to make things up. Like, we have no budget to go and visit all of them in person. How do I do that? Is let's invite them to come on and we can do a virtual learning for them. Maybe we can put together a webinar, but everybody and anybody does a webinar. Like, how do you make yours different? How do you make it effective? Because you and I know the reality. We'll go to an event, we'll listen to a webinar, we'll listen to an awesome podcast and said, this was the best information ever, I can't wait to apply it. Then we go back to our real world life, and then
Yep.
real life gets in the way, and then we forget, and all those priorities just become ideas that are left on paper. And so said, okay, how do I want them to do that? I need to implement repetition. So then I'll think about this. If I'm planning, let's say, a webinar or a video, let's say, for example, then I know I need to have a high impact open, and then I need to make sure that I'm having these little spikes throughout to hold the attention. And so whether that's an interaction or whether it's another cool stat or it's another question, you need to build in spikes throughout, because otherwise what happens, excitement peaks at the beginning and then attention fades off because phones, email, everything is very sexy and compelling and
Yes.
distracting. So can I build in little peaks of attention throughout? So that's one. Then I'll try to think about generate, like, how do I connect it to things that most people already know? What are analogies that I could use to help it really stick in minds? And then I'll think about, how do I make it fun? How do I make it entertaining? How do I make it, tap into nostalgia or tap into, any of the emotions that I want to feel? Maybe it's reassurance that maybe it's something new and scary and people are panicking. Oh, AI is taking our jobs. Cookies are going away. And maybe it's like, no, 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 don't worry. Like, we can empower you that other people have felt this way. And then the biggest thing is the spacing is, I don't just let it be one webinar. I'll give people the first next step they can take. So I'll give them a little planner or a worksheet or a checklist or something. And then I'll have people follow up 2 weeks later with a quick either email or additional resource, or maybe a social media post or something like that. And then I'll post it 2 or 3 times after, so that way it sticks in people's mind, and then they'll remember. They're like, oh my gosh, remember that super cool episode of Glenn's podcast? I want to go back and listen to it again. So yeah, that would be the goal.
Well, and then, yeah, boy, that's quite a goal. I would
And
love
then
that
you
one.
measure everything and you know what you're measuring for.
Right. Right. And, you've injected so many ways to kind of bump up that interest. And when the interest is there, then the retention and the true engagement is there. You talk about using text, image, audio, video, like all the tools in the tool chest to make this stuff so it's going to drive responses and results. Um, I want to get into kind of how this wonderfully executed content comes about. It's not by accident. You talk about a plan, and I want to delve into that plan. But before we do that, we're going to take a really quick break. I'll step away to address one thing that's been missing from Funnel Reboot: the ability to access the text of any show. I'm glad to finally announce that the podcast is now fully searchable and copyable thanks to the transcript feature in YouTube. Yes, YouTube. Now, even though the last 165 shows are audio only, they are all on YouTube. Go on to YouTube, head to Funnel Reboot's channel, and on the channel's masthead page, click the magnifying glass and search away. And while you're there, please consider subscribing to get future shows. There will be even more to say on transcripts in the coming days, but I'm pleased this capability is now available. Okay, now let's get back to the show. All right, Purna, you seem to be rather practical in how you talk about planning these things. First off, you tell us not to try to make a 5-year plan. You tell us not to have no plan. What is a good time horizon? I know it depends by industry, but can you tell me if I'm in a industry where there aren't maybe hyper developing things every month, can you tell me what kind of time horizon we should normally plan for?
So again, I'll caveat, and I know you caveated that as well. Is like, how fast can you steer the ship
Hmm.
really, and then how risk averse or how open to change or something it is. So it depends on your industry and your organization. But I find it's like, as you said, you don't want anything that's too short or nothing that's too long. You want to be like Goldilocks and get the one that's just right. And what I find is that if you plan for too short a time frame, you can sometimes be too focused on short-term results, and then you'll accidentally filter out anything that could be really, really impactful a year from now. But you're like, oh, I just don't want to get started because I'm only looking at success in the next 4 to 6 weeks. But if you go too long, then you're just, things peter out, or you may not really be able to move and keep up with any evolutions in the business. So again, it really varies by business to business, but see what you can do. So I personally like the 6 month plan. Like I go with every half of the fiscal year. And
Yep.
then of course I'll break down, like, here's what I'm going to do in this quarter 1 versus quarter 2. But I'll still know that I'm working on stuff that is a little bit short term, but I also am moving and executing on things that are longer. And even if I'm just planning for 6 months at a time, I keep an ideas list that is stuff for longer term. Or I'll try to look at, like, what's a roadmap, what's
Right.
something that might need more work that I can invest in now. And then it's just a simple prioritization exercise, which is what makes it above the line and what makes it below the line. But I keep up my list of below the line items to see if I can ever move things up and down. But yeah, so many times we also um, unintentionally sabotage ourselves by trying to do too much. And
Yeah.
it's like, no, no, no. Think about, fewer things done really, really well, and you'll be well on your way to success. And that does take some discipline and research and analysis beforehand, but it is worth it because it starts to pay off. And
Yeah.
while you're doing the research, you can certainly do some short-term things to keep up.
Yes. So that sense of coming up with the right content. I like the fact that you keep a list going. Um, Even if the content is, let's say, strategically right, though, we do have to think about the freshness or staleness. You said that they're like products, right? And some products have famously, been rolled out into a market at the wrong time. So we've got to make sure that we get the right time for that content, which is our audience, about to be, or are they currently interested in it, right? Are they talking about
Mhm.
it? So let's go into that research you mentioned, because there's a whole bunch that we need to do externally to understand what our audience needs. And we'll get to the internal later, but the external stuff, you encourage us to do some analysis and then do some interviewing. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. And we can dive into internal later, but it really starts first with looking at what's going to move the needle for your business. And I'll do this in 30 seconds, but you can have multiple offerings, or there's different routes you could take, and you'll have audiences interested in different ones. So choose the path that's going to make the most profit or most impact for your business. And then once you choose that angle, then go down and look at like what are customers asking about, what do they care, what do they need. So then you want to start by looking at who is the right customer that you should study. Now that's a big thing, like people just
Yes.
hear talk to your customers and then they'll go create just a sort of random selection of customers, but that's not where you should start. If you're going for high impact, you want to think about the types of customers that you want more of. And all customers are very important, but not all customers are worth the same to your business, right? The lifetime value is
Yes.
very different. So you want the people who are the ones who really spend or who might refer you to others, who are those fans, like, who's that upper stratum of customer that you're like, if I had 10 more of X, Y, and Z, we would be sorted. And so try to find those people, ask them, what was your motive, what did you like about us, or how did you realize you had a need for what we had to offer, what did you imagine it would do for you, or how did you find us, why did you choose us versus competitors. You want to really understand how they think, their motivations, like what difference it made to their life by buying that, what questions they had, what sort of preconceived notions. And there's a few different ways that you can go in and do that. You want to talk to the customers that you want more of, but you also want to talk to the customers that actually didn't buy, because they will give you much more valuable information because they didn't choose you. So what prevented them from choosing you? And it's totally okay to go out and ask people. You will find people open to doing that, especially if you can position it as, look, I'm not trying to pitch you. I
Yeah.
genuinely am just on the marketing team and I just want to learn, why did you choose somebody else? What were some of the motivations for doing that? Like, what would have been different for us for you to want, whatever
Right.
questions you have, I've listed them out in the book.
Right.
Learn
And
about
certainly
them.
not in a defensive way, right? You're trying to
Exactly.
see how they perceive you, and you may learn something that you completely didn't intend with the way your content appears, but that this one person is sharing it with you, which means there must be others that see that too.
For sure. And this was one of my sort of business mentors had, one of my sort of work mentors had told me this, that Purna, if you ever hear any negative sort of feedback or constructive feedback, he's like, you've got to times that by 10, because
Yeah.
it's so much more that's happening than what actually people will come and even tell you. So be really, really careful. And it's the same thing with your customers too. So if you can hear about this, exactly as you said, Glenn, there's lots of others who are thinking that too. And it could be something as simple as maybe your positioning is wrong. Like maybe, you're positioning it in terms of like, here's all the value that we add, here's all of this, and then maybe people are like, okay, you talk a good talk, but who are you? Like, I don't know anything about your brand. Like, the brand perception we may have of you isn't very strong, and so maybe you need to beef up that side, or sort of adjust your pitch to make sure that you're overcoming some of this other common objections that may have, right? Or vice versa. Or maybe you're just not talking to the right person. So in any case, if you try to figure out who's the decision maker, who are they like, and also one of my favorite tips, please, please, please be reading your reviews and that of your
Right.
competitors. I love
Yes.
it.
Secondary research.
Secondary research, but also it's literally your customer's own words. And I'll tell you an example when that happened. A long time ago, I was consulting for a client that was they owned a hotel in the Caribbean. It was one of those all-inclusive fancy
Okay.
resorts, and they were super convinced. They said that our sort of unique selling proposition is our beach. We have this 1 mile long private beach, super gorgeous, like, powdery sand, you name it. And we're like, okay, great, we'll push it. But that's hardly different, right? In the Caribbean, you're just spoiled for choice with like beautiful beaches. And so then I realized from reading the reviews that everybody was, a lot of the really, really glowing reviews were, we love the fact that they had so many different restaurants and there was different dining options. So we just didn't feel bored at all eating the same thing all the time. And we didn't
Right.
feel like we needed to leave the resort at all. And so we're like,
Wow.
everyone's starting with the dining options. So why don't we play that up and dial that up in some of their copy? And so we went out and we did this whole push about, yeah, you're there for the sand but and the sort of sea, but you also eat like this. And so we sort of promoted all the different dining options and they saw a little uptick in conversions too. So it really pays off. Your customers are going to tell you what they like and don't like, and so just listen to them and you can leverage their words and your marketing copy will practically write itself. So why use ChatGPT? I'm only kidding. But yeah.
We'll touch on that later. But no, the point is that everything that you put out and that your competitors put out it's fodder for understanding what your users need, and you go with so many different ways that this information can be collected. You suggest the one-to-one interviews. You suggest observations, or what I used to call ride-alongs, where you're going with sales. The use of a diary study, which I'm only used to hearing UX people talk about, but you're sure. Can you get content ideas from these areas? Absolutely. And then the last one that I thought was so right was auditing what our competitors do. This is so, and I'm living this right now. I teach a university course on uh, marketing and advertising, and uh, it was so informative. All I did was I asked the students to go and look at companies that they admire, and then to go and basically screen grab and copy all the stuff that they could find that those companies had put out, all their content, dump it into a document, and then just look at it and see what you can see. You call it decoding. There's so much that we can glean, and I'm not saying we copy them, but you point out rightly that they're staring at the same audience you are. So there must be some things that you can infer that you will at least then be able to reflect on how you're using your own content, and you get to say yay or nay to those things.
For sure. And the big thing about looking at competitors is so you know how to differentiate yourself and how you position yourself. Because pretty much like the Caribbean resort, right? Everybody's posting about their beautiful beach and
Yeah.
everything like that. But what was different about them was people were like, oh, we love the dining. So they could stand out because they knew how to position it. And that's exactly why you look at your competitors is so you know what's coming up, who to pay attention to, because very often it's those, companies tend to have a certain amount of people or other competitors who they feel very extra salty about, but they may or may not be your competitors online. You've got to see who's
Yeah.
showing up on the places that you are, who else is your target audience seeing and what are they seeing. So if you are like, oh, I have the best idea to come up with another article about chat gpt prompts, and if you just did that in a vacuum, maybe that's fine if no one else existed. But if you looked just one quick Bing or Google search, you'd be like, oh, there's 8,000 other articles on chat GPT prompts that I can use. So then what's going to make mine different? Or
Yeah.
do I even need to write that? Do I take another angle so
Well,
that I can be unique and fresh and stand out? And so that's a big thing about why you want to look at your competitors, is they help you with your positioning, and you can also sort of decode what they're doing and what they are not doing, so you can find these open spaces to dominate.
yeah, we've been repeating this theme of paying attention to the customer and trying to remove ourselves as the focal point here and try to push it onto them. The way that you put that so nicely is that you are trying to figure out what their frustrations are, what things, particularly when they were in market for a solution, how did they go about solving their problem? And this is where we end up with a solid editorial calendar of ideas, not what I've seen, which is people who ignore all that research and listening and simply write, well, in the case of, let's say, marketing firms, I've seen so many that write, what are the 5 things that a company needs to know in picking a marketing firm? Like,
Yeah.
that is so baldly self-serving, it's not even
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah, for sure. I've seen all of that too. I'm like, why would they
Yeah,
want to read that? Are they even taking
nobody's going
any
to read that.
information? And it would take literally like one, you could even do if you didn't even want to pick up the phone, do a quick search on uh, Google or Bing and see what people also ask. So maybe you can do the search for, choosing a marketing firm. It'll have those questions that people are tending to put into search as well. I mean, of course, that's one focal point,
Yes,
and that's everybody.
auto
You really
suggest.
want to
Yeah,
know your audience and see what they were doing, and then you'd come up with better content. Which is why I'm like, why are you sort of, it's putting this extra effort and work on yourself to be like, what do I create? How do I say this? Where am I going? Do I need to be on 800 different platforms and channels? And you're like, no, make your life easier. Just go and look at what your customers are
see,
doing.
like we said at the beginning, if you do the right strategy, then it is easier,
It
for
is
sure.
so much easier, and just make life easier and more efficient for yourself. And that is you have to respect your audience's time, but you also have to respect your own time. And that's, as a
Yeah,
marketer too, you're there's always more things we could be doing than there are hours in the day. And
yeah.
so help yourself prioritize more effectively, and then
Yeah,
you'll get the results that you so want.
that's right. You make it so pragmatic where you actually do go to the bother of mapping out a 40-hour work week and figuring out, once the process of identifying what you're going to do, you actually get into the execution of it. And we don't have time to cover all that, but there's one or two of the best practices in, how do you make your content compelling that I just have to get to. One of them is, and I suppose people who are familiar from journalism will know the phrase burying the lead. You try to make it clear that we should not do that. And I mean, it's an easy trap. I fall in it myself all the time. But you gave me like a mental hack to get around it. You said I had to think about the afters and then I had to flip them to come first. Describe what that means.
So the term afters comes from this awesome sales leadership expert called Andy Bounds in the UK, who I was very fortunate to interview for the book. And I loved how he phrased it as just the afters, because it's such a simple short word to
Mhm.
say. And so often when we start, actually, let me rephrase it this way. You have all of this energy when you start reading the post. And if you're not getting all your information, it's gonna just peter out, and then people are just gonna swipe past. So you want to give them what they're looking for, or all the key information up front, just like a journalist does. So if you ever look at any news article, it'll give you the who, what, when, where, how, all in the first paragraph. So you get all the info if that's all you read. And then if you read more, then you can get way more detail. And so if there's important words, if there's important things that you want to have, don't just make sure it's in the content. You want to make sure it's right up there up front. So that way there's more chances of people reading it, or consuming it, because they may not go all the way. The other thing to think about is really people aren't buying what you do, right? They're buying what it will do for them later. And so you want to keep that in mind and spell that out explicitly. Um, for example, like, hey, why am I buying this new pair of running shoes? It's not because it's oh, I want to spend more money with XYZ brand. It is because I want to either run better, I want to protect my knees more when I run, or I just want to look more stylish, right? There's some end result that I'm going for that's motivating my purchase. And so rather than being like, come and buy these shoes because they were engineered by this, it's all about, hey, what do you know protect your knees while looking more
Right.
stylish or something like this. And so it's all about what's going to happen after. And so literally go down like a child and be like, okay, why do I want to buy this? Because it's got this extra technology. Like, why is that cool? Because it protects your knees. You're like, now I'm onto something. And so go down just like if imagine you had this 2-year-old asking you why every time, and then you'll get there. And that is good because, or like, why do I care?
Yeah.
And then you'll come up and then just reverse engineer it when you're doing that. It's like,
Exactly. Yeah. So many of the things that you get us over, you simply reverse them. And I mean, it just reminds me how pliable our brain is and how we can, basically almost do martial arts on our own brain to help us understand what we're really saying. The other one, very handy, is write the headline last.
yeah.
Um, the 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 beginning, you said, as a journalist, and you have a journalism background, is in doing the 5 W's right in the first bit. But you actually encourage us to maybe even give it a little bit more of a sexy hook. And you quote uh, a novelist I love, Ursula K. Le Guin, and she said, first sentences are the doors to worlds. So is what you're saying that, we can model after some of the great novels, which, they're kind of known for having a first sentence that is absolutely compelling and that makes you want to keep reading.
Isn't it? And I always say that great content creators are great consumers of content as
Right.
well. And it- I explained this in my chapter on brainstorming, but it's so funny that our mind subconsciously will piece together ideas based on what we consume. So it's literally what you feed the diet that you feed your brain is really going to
Yeah.
be the sauce and richness of ideas, and they'll proliferate and combine and join in different ways. And there's so many brilliant scientists who have actually studied how our brains come up with ideas, whose research I've tried to include and share in the book as well, to explain. Go and read more, because ultimately books, whether it's a book or a TV show or not, whatever it
Or
is,
a walk.
or a podcast, sometimes you they are also marketing content, right? If I'm creating a book, if I'm creating a podcast, if I'm creating a video, I want more people to consume it. That's how it's successful. And so look at how others do it, and you'll get great ideas to do that. And then let those ideas decant in your head, or as you said, go for a walk your dog, be on a plane, just be somewhere where your brain's quiet and can all these ideas will start popping within your head. It's like magic, and it's so fascinating to me. But that's where they come in. So keep reading more. Look at how other greats frame their sentences. Look at the words that they use.
Right.
Look at how they generate the flow or keep you wanting to read on.
That's it. And you don't have to divulge to the audience that you're writing where you got these ideas. So yeah, I'm like you, Purna. I'm just telling people, go play, go,
Hmm.
sandbox all you want, because your brain will fashion it into something that is compelling. Uh, we can't leave this. Here we are recording, in a age of AI and ChatGPT. Um, it is clearly, a game-changing technology in terms of how it can put words together. Um, I'm going to ask you what you think of it, but I think I have. I think I know a bit of your answer because you say right up front in the book that what we're really working on in marketing is we're working around human behavior and humans and how they think. That is a rather timeless and unchanging thing. So, I'd love you to say why um, ChatGPT and others, may not change things holistically, but are there any areas that you think that they will change how we work?
So look, I, for one, have been deeply involved with. I've been talking about AI and its impact on search and marketing for many, many years, because from my time at Microsoft, when voice search and everything that came out. And I have the utmost respect for AI, and I think it's incredible and it's amazing. And at the end of the day, it is still a tool. And the job is to empower us, the human, to give us superpowers to come up with creativity of the likes that we could not have before. And it sort of reduces the barrier to entry. So for the most part, I am very much pro AI, but I'm also pro in like any tool, how it's used. And if you're going to just use a tool to take a shortcut, maybe that's not in the audience's humans end goal, and you're just using it to like sort of spam the algo and manipulate the algo, then it's not going to work long term. But if you want it to really work long term, is you can use it to help better understand your audience, or come up with new types of content or make it more accessible. And in that way, you're just going to engage and delight your audience, which is, I think, a really good note to end on.
Yeah. Well, that is that high-minded objective that just permeates the book, is to try to really connect with another person. And I think we're lucky in marketing that we even get to do something like this. Sure, there are, other maybe more noble ways. There are fields like psychiatry and such where you're actually healing people. But I think being able to give people a way to get solutions to their problems, sure, there's going to be some element of commercial gain there, but it's really interesting. I mean, it would certainly be better than a world without marketing where everything is bland and the same and absolutely nothing stands out. That isn't the kind of world that humans want to live in. So I say, now that we're in this world, we might as well reach them with, all of the faculties that we have and that they have. And I think you've done an amazing job in this book of trying to wrap that together for content. Purna, if people want to get the book or they want to, let's say, reach out, where can listeners go to get that?
Well, firstly, I'm super happy to chat marketing anytime. So hit me up on LinkedIn, of course, or also on X, formerly known as Twitter, or my favorite way of somebody calling it is Twix. So, I'm at Purna Virji on Twix and on LinkedIn.
Okay. All right. Perfect.
And then for the book, you can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or your friendly bookseller near you. It's available anywhere, or you can go to koganpage.com, which is my publisher, and they should be able to ship it for free there.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, Purna.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun, Glenn.
I think gives people a better sense of how they can make their content so that they can make their funnel even better.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter at Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.